The sky above Earth suddenly changed. It was not like any storm or strange weather that humans had ever seen. A massive spaceship, unlike anything on Earth, appeared in the sky. It was enormous, glowing with strange lights. People stopped what they were doing and looked up in shock. Some thought it was just a new kind of satellite, but others feared the worst. What if it was an alien invasion? The entire world held its breath, waiting for what would happen next. People in cities everywhere started to panic. Sirens blared, and people ran for shelter. News channels all over the world scrambled to report the event. Experts tried to explain it away, but no one had ever seen anything like it. This ship was too big, too advanced. It moved slowly across the sky, and the world's governments went into action. Military forces were put on high alert, and people were told to stay indoors. It felt like the end of the world. But as the ship hovered over the Earth, something surprising happened. A strange signal came through all communication systems. It was not a threat. It was a message. The language was unknown, but the tone was calm, almost peaceful. Earth's top scientists and military leaders tried to decode it, but nothing worked. The alien ship had technology far beyond anything Earth could imagine. Then, out of nowhere, the signal changed. It was no longer just noise. It became a language that humans could understand. The voice spoke directly to the people of Earth, calm and clear. "We come in peace. We have been watching your world for many years. We are not here to harm you. We are here to learn from you." The world paused. Could this be real? Were the aliens truly peaceful? The voice continued. "We have seen the strength of your warriors. We have studied your history, your battles, your wars. We are curious about your fighters, the ones who have lived through great wars and survived. We want to understand them, to study their ways of fighting." For a moment, everyone stood in silence. Earth's leaders and experts were unsure of what to do. The military was ready to act, but the message was not one of aggression. It was strange, peaceful, yet unsettling. Who were these aliens? And why did they want to learn about Earth's warriors? Suddenly, a new message flashed on every screen, and this one was clearer than ever. The aliens were asking for something specific. They wanted to meet Earth's veterans, the soldiers who had fought in the wars of the past. The aliens believed these veterans had something the rest of the world didn't: experience. They were interested in studying how humans fought without limits or rules. The aliens thought that Earth's veterans could teach them about strategy and survival. The message ended, but the impact it left was unforgettable. The world now had to face the idea that humans might not be the only intelligent beings in the universe. These aliens were watching, studying, and strangely, seemed to respect Earth's warriors. In the days that followed, Earth's leaders gathered to discuss the next steps. Should they trust these aliens? Should they send veterans to meet them? Many were skeptical. Some believed it was all a trick. How could anyone trust beings from another world who wanted to study war? Yet the message was clear. The aliens were not interested in fighting. They only wanted to understand. The world's governments began to organize. They knew they had to decide which veterans should meet these aliens, who would represent the warriors of Earth. The veterans had been through so much. Many of them had fought in wars long ago, wars that had left deep scars. They were not the same young soldiers who had once marched into battle. Some had retired, others had grown old, but all of them had lived through violence and conflict. They were survivors. And so, the call went out to Earth's veterans. It was a strange, almost surreal moment. Many veterans thought their days of fighting were long behind them. They had returned to their homes, to peaceful lives. They had earned their rest. But now, the aliens were calling. Some were excited about the chance to meet beings from another world. Others were reluctant, too old, too tired to fight again. But many veterans felt a sense of duty. They had fought for Earth once before. Could they do it again, even if the battle was not against each other, but against something unknown. The veterans who answered the call were a mix of age and experience. Some had been soldiers in ancient wars. Others had fought in more recent conflicts. They had seen things most people would never understand. They had lived through pain, loss, and survival. Now they were being asked to represent all of humanity's warriors. It was an honor, but also a heavy burden. In a small room, somewhere deep in a military facility, Earth's leaders gathered to make their decision. They knew that sending veterans to meet the aliens could change everything. It could lead to peace, or it could be a trap. But they had no choice. They would have to trust the aliens. For now. As the meeting ended, one leader stood and spoke. "We will send our veterans. We will show them what it means to fight as humans do. Let's hope that they understand our strength, our honor, and our will to survive. We do not know what will happen next, but we must prepare." And so, the veterans were called to duty once again, this time not to fight a war, but to face an unknown enemy in the form of beings from another world. Little did they know, the aliens had made a dangerous mistake. They had underestimated Earth's veterans. The aliens wanted to learn about humanity's warriors, but what they didn't realize was that humans fought without rules. And that could be more dangerous than anything they had ever faced before. The world was still in shock. No one had expected this. Aliens, a race so advanced, had come to Earth not to conquer, but to study. They were fascinated by Earth's warriors, the veterans who had fought through countless wars and lived to tell the stories. But now, it was time for the veterans themselves to step forward. The call to action echoed across the globe. News reports were filled with stories of the veterans, old and young, who had been selected. These were men and women who had fought in wars long ago, and others who had only recently retired. Some had been soldiers in the world wars, others in smaller conflicts, but all of them had seen the horrors of battle. Now they were being asked to meet with the aliens to demonstrate the true strength of Earth's warriors. At first, many veterans didn't know how to feel. Some had lived peaceful lives after years of combat. They had families, jobs, and homes. They had left the past behind. The memories of war haunted them, but they had hoped that their days of fighting were over. Some were ready to return. They had always been soldiers at heart, and the call for help stirred something deep inside them. Others, however, were reluctant. They were old, tired, and scared from past battles. Could they really go back to war, even if the enemy wasn't human? One of the first veterans to answer the call was General David Harper. He had fought in a number of wars, each one more brutal than the last. Now, at 65, he was retired, living on a quiet farm in the countryside. His health wasn't the best, and he had seen too much in his time. But when the call came, he knew he couldn't ignore it. The world needed him again. And he couldn't let down the future generations who would never truly understand the price of peace. Do I really have a choice? General Harper thought as he looked at the letter requesting his presence. It's not just about me anymore. It's about humanity. Another veteran, Sarah Miller, had served in a war that felt like it belonged to another time. She was in her 50s, but her mind was sharp and her skills were still quick. Like many others, she had put the war behind her. She ran a small business now, had a family, and enjoyed the quiet life. But deep down, she knew she still had that warrior inside her. The call to arms had awakened something she had tried to bury. For her, this wasn't just about duty. It was about showing the aliens what it meant to be human. To fight not just for survival, but for something deeper. I've been waiting for a reason, Sarah thought as she packed her bags. Maybe this is it. As the veterans began to gather, it became clear that they were from all walks of life. Some were retired soldiers. Others were mercenaries who had fought for pay in various conflicts around the world. They had seen the worst of humanity, but had lived through it, their survival skills unmatched. Now, they were about to face a different kind of enemy, the aliens. But one thing was certain, no matter who or what the enemy was, these veterans were used to one thing: war. The first meeting with the aliens was set in a massive military facility. The veterans were flown in from all over the world and gathered together for the first time. They didn't know what to expect. They had been briefed on the aliens, but all the information seemed vague. The aliens had promised peace, but they also wanted to study the veterans' combat skills. The veterans, in turn, knew that they needed to be careful. They were not just going to trust the aliens. They had fought too many wars and had seen too much deception to just walk into a situation without questions. When they finally arrived at the facility, they were greeted by the aliens in a large hall. The aliens were unlike anything the veterans had imagined. Tall, with smooth gray skin, and eyes that seemed to glow with intelligence, they didn't look like anything from the movies. They were calm and respectful, but there was something unsettling about their presence. The veterans couldn't help but feel like they were being watched, studied, as though they were the subjects of some grand experiment. The leader of the aliens, a being known as Saul, stepped forward and addressed the group. "We thank you for answering our call. We have studied your world, your history, your wars. But we are curious about the ones who fought in those wars, the veterans. You have lived through what no one should have to face. We want to learn from you. We believe that your experience holds a key to understanding how your species survives." The veterans exchanged glances. They had expected something more, something with more action. But this wasn't about fighting. This was about understanding. The aliens wanted to know how humans survived, how they managed to push through pain, loss, and death to come out on the other side. The veterans were being asked to teach, not to fight. But that didn't mean they didn't have their own questions. General Harper stepped forward, his voice steady but firm. "What do you want from us?" he asked. "What is it that you think you can learn from us?" Saul's eyes seemed to flash with a hint of something. Maybe it was excitement, or maybe it was something else entirely. But Saul's answer was simple. "We want to understand how you fight. We want to know how you survive against impossible odds, with no rules, no mercy. We know that you are not like us. You are unpredictable, dangerous. We need to understand why that is." There it was, the truth. The aliens had made a mistake. They thought they could study humanity's veterans and learn about combat. But what they didn't realize was that the veterans weren't like the warriors from other worlds. They fought for survival, not for glory. They fought because they had to. They had no rules, no mercy, and that was something the aliens could never fully understand. The veterans stood tall, ready to face whatever was next. This wouldn't be just about teaching. It would be about survival, just like it always had been. And no one, not even the aliens, would be prepared for what came next. The veterans stood in a large room, their eyes scanning the strange alien technology around them. The walls were smooth, glowing faintly in soft blue hues. The air was cool, but the tension in the room was thick. The veterans had been briefed on what the aliens wanted from them. The aliens were not here to invade. They were here to study, to observe. But the veterans were not sure what to expect. After all, they were used to fighting in wars, not being studied like lab rats. Saul, the leader of the aliens, appeared once again. His tall, thin frame was imposing, and his glowing eyes never seemed to blink. He had a calm, almost eerie presence, but his voice was steady as he addressed the group of veterans. "Welcome," Saul said, his voice resonating through the room. "We have seen the strength and resilience of your warriors, but we need to understand more. We need to understand how you fight, how you survive when all hope is lost. We will test you, not with weapons, but with challenges that will push you to your limits." The veterans exchanged nervous glances. They were prepared to fight, but not like this. They weren't sure if they were ready to be tested by beings who had never seen true war. Still, there was no turning back now. They had been called, and they would answer. They had survived wars, battles, and conflicts no one could imagine. Whatever the aliens threw at them, they would face it head-on. The first challenge was a series of physical trials, agility tests, strength exercises, and endurance challenges. The aliens watched, taking notes as the veterans completed each test. The veterans weren't as young as they once were, but they were still strong. General Harper, despite his age, showed that he could still run faster than most of the younger soldiers in the room. Sarah Miller, her eyes focused and sharp, completed every task with precision, pushing herself harder than she ever had before. The aliens seemed fascinated by their performance. They had never seen anything like it. The veterans were not just physically strong, they were mentally tough. They could push through pain, fatigue, and fear. Every time they were tested, they came out on top. But as the challenges continued, something strange began to happen. The aliens' questions started to grow more complex. They no longer just wanted to know how the veterans survived. They wanted to know why. Why did they fight? Why did they push themselves to the limit? The veterans tried to answer, but the questions seemed to dig deeper and deeper into their souls. "You fight with no mercy," Zal said, his eyes narrowing. "You do not follow rules like other warriors. You fight because you have no choice. But why? What drives you?" The veterans paused. These were questions they had never really asked themselves. They fought because they had to. They fought because they had been trained to. They fought to protect their people, their homes, and their families. They fought because, in war, there was no other choice. General Harper stepped forward, his voice low but steady. "We fight to survive. In war, there are no rules. There's no honor in being second. You either win or you die. And we've learned that the only way to win is to fight harder than the enemy. Without mercy. Without hesitation." Sarah Miller nodded. "We don't fight for glory. We fight to survive. To protect the ones we love. To make sure the future can live in peace, even if it costs us everything." Zal seemed deep in thought, his glowing eyes flickering. He looked at the veterans as though they were not just humans, but something completely foreign. Something dangerous. And that was when the next challenge began. The room shifted, and a new test appeared before them. It was not a physical challenge this time. It was something far more dangerous. The aliens had created a simulation of a battlefield. It was a replica of a war zone from Earth's past. The veterans were placed in the middle of it, and the goal was simple: survive. The simulation was not just about fighting, it was about strategy. The veterans would have to use everything they knew about warfare to survive. They would need to outthink, outmaneuver, and outfight the enemies that were placed before them. The stakes were high. If they failed, they would be trapped in the simulation until they succeeded. The veterans quickly realized that this wasn't just a test of their strength or skill. It was a test of their minds. General Harper took command immediately, his experience shining through. He knew that strategy was key. They couldn't just fight. Each decision had to be calculated, each move carefully planned. They set up defenses, laid traps, and waited for the enemies to approach. But the aliens weren't just going to let them win easily. The simulation began, and the veterans sprang into action. It was chaos. Gunfire, explosions, and the sound of battle filled the air. But the veterans moved like they had been born for this moment. General Harper gave orders, and the team followed without hesitation. They worked together, using their knowledge of past wars to navigate the battlefield. Sarah Miller took down enemies from a distance with deadly precision, while others set traps and ambushes. The simulation was intense, and the veterans were pushed to their limits. The aliens watched, silent and observant, taking notes on every move the humans made. The veterans moved with a grace and efficiency that the aliens had never seen before. They didn't just fight. They thought, planned, and adapted to the situation at hand. After what felt like hours, the simulation ended. The veterans stood victorious, breathing heavily, their faces marked by the sweat and dirt of the battle. The aliens did not cheer, they simply observed. "You have passed the test," Zal said, his voice cold but impressed. "You are survivors. You fight with no mercy, no hesitation. You use every advantage you have to win." The veterans were exhausted, but there was a sense of pride in their hearts. They had proven their worth, not just as soldiers, but as survivors. They had shown the aliens something they could never have predicted. Humans didn't fight by the rules. They fought to win. And in a war, that was the only thing that mattered. But as the veterans left the simulation room, something lingered in the air. The aliens were not done with their tests. They had learned a lot, but there was still more to discover. And for the veterans, the worst was yet to come. The veterans had proven their strength, their resilience, and their intelligence. They had passed every challenge the aliens had set before them, showing no mercy and no hesitation. But as the days went by, something began to feel off. The veterans couldn't shake the feeling that they were being pushed into something more than just a test of their skills. The aliens' interest seemed to be growing darker, more intense, and the veterans began to question what the aliens really wanted. General David Harper could feel the shift in the air. The aliens had seemed fascinated by Earth's warriors at first, almost respectful. But now, they were more like distant observers, watching every move, taking notes, analyzing everything. The challenges had become increasingly difficult, and the pressure was mounting. The veterans could tell that the aliens were studying them more closely now, not just as soldiers, but as something deeper, something more dangerous. It was during a routine meeting with Saul, the alien leader, that the true nature of their intentions began to reveal itself. The aliens had arranged for a private discussion, a conversation that had been set up away from the others. Harper, along with Sarah Miller and a few others, were summoned to a dark, sterile room. The walls were lined with strange alien symbols, glowing faintly. The room was silent, save for the hum of the alien technology in the background. Zal stood in the center, his glowing eyes fixed on the group. "We are pleased with your progress," Zal said, his voice calm but with an underlying tension. "You have shown us much about your kind, your survival instincts, your strength, your tenacity. You are not like the other species we have encountered." The veterans exchanged uneasy glances. The praise sounded good, but it didn't feel right. General Harper knew that something was coming, something they weren't prepared for. "You said you wanted to understand how we fight," Harper said, his voice steady, but his mind racing. "But now, I'm beginning to wonder. What exactly do you want from us? You've asked us to demonstrate how we fight, how we survive. But why? What is it that you're truly after?" Zal's eyes flickered, and for the first time, Harper saw a glimmer of something darker, something like fear, or perhaps regret. The alien leader took a deep breath and began to speak in a lower tone. "We did not come here just to study your warriors. We came here to learn something far more dangerous." Harper felt a chill run down his spine. The other veterans shifted uncomfortably, their eyes narrowing. They could sense the change in the air. The aliens were not just fascinated by war, they were obsessed with it. Zal continued, "We have studied many worlds, many species. We have conquered countless planets, absorbing their knowledge, their technology, their ways of life. But there is one thing we have never understood, something that has eluded us for centuries. The reason why your species fights with such unpredictability." Sarah Miller stepped forward, her face hardening. "Unpredictability. You mean we fight without rules? We fight without mercy. We do what needs to be done, even if it goes against everything else. We fight because we have to, because our survival depends on it." Zal's expression darkened. "Yes, that is exactly what we need to understand. Your unpredictability, your ability to fight without boundaries, has intrigued us. But we are not just interested in understanding it. We need it. Our species is dying, General Harper. We cannot survive without your instinct for war." The words hit like a bombshell. The veterans stood in stunned silence, struggling to process what they had just heard. The aliens, these advanced, seemingly peaceful beings, were not simply curious about humanity's combat skills. They wanted to harness that very unpredictability. They wanted to use humanity's warriors for their own survival. "We cannot fight the way you do," Zal continued, his tone growing more urgent. "Our species relies on rules, on structure, on logic. But in the face of extinction, we have learned that we must evolve. We must adapt. And your unpredictability is the key. We have tried to replicate your methods, but it is not enough. We need you to teach us how to fight like you." The realization hit the veterans all at once. The aliens hadn't come to Earth just to learn. They had come to use them. They had come to take Earth's warriors, to understand their raw, primal instincts, and then to replicate those instincts in their own species. The veterans had become nothing more than a means to an end. General Harper took a step forward, his voice cold and steady. "You want us to teach you how to fight without rules, how to fight without mercy. But we've been through wars, Zal. We've seen things that have changed us forever. We fight because we have to, because we know what happens when you don't. You cannot just take that from us. It's not something you can replicate." Zal's eyes flickered again, and for a moment, the alien leader looked almost disappointed. "You do not understand. We are at the brink of extinction. Our species cannot survive without learning your ways, without mastering your unpredictability. And we are willing to do whatever it takes to achieve that." Harper's mind raced. The veterans had always known that war changed people. It scared them, twisted them, and sometimes it made them stronger. But it also broke them. And the aliens wanted to use that brokenness, that unpredictability, to survive. "We cannot be your soldiers," Sarah Miller said, her voice filled with anger. "We are not your tools." Zal's expression hardened. "You have no choice. You will teach us, or we will take what we need from you." The room fell silent. The veterans stood in defiance, their faces hard, their eyes filled with a fire that the aliens could not understand. They had come to teach, to show the aliens what it meant to be human. But now they realized that they were not just part of a test. They were being used, manipulated. Zal seemed to sense the shift in the room. His calm demeanor began to crack. "Do not misunderstand. We do not wish to destroy you. But we need your skills. We need your unpredictability. And we will have them, one way or another." The veterans exchanged determined glances. This was no longer about helping the aliens. It was about survival. It was about stopping the aliens from using them, and their skills for their own selfish purposes. General Harper stepped forward, his voice a low growl. "You may have the technology, you may have the power, but you'll never have what it takes to be a true warrior. You'll never understand the cost of war." The tension in the room was palpable. The veterans knew what had to be done. The aliens had underestimated them. And now, they would pay the price. The tension in the room was unbearable. The veterans stood in a tight circle, eyes locked on Zal, who seemed to grow more and more agitated. The true reason for the aliens' visit had been revealed, and it was nothing short of terrifying. The veterans had thought they were helping the aliens understand humanity's strength, but now they realized that they were nothing more than pawns in a deadly game. Zal's cold, glowing eyes locked onto General Harper, his voice rising in frustration. "You cannot refuse us. Your skills are the key to saving our species. Do not make this harder than it has to be." Harper stood tall, his mind racing. He was old, yes, and weary from a lifetime of fighting. But one thing he knew was that he would never, under any circumstances, allow himself or his comrades to become tools for another species' survival. No one could understand war the way humanity did, not even these powerful, seemingly invincible aliens. Sarah Miller stepped forward, her face hard with resolve. "We didn't survive all those wars to be enslaved by your desperation. You've underestimated us. Zal. You've underestimated what it means to be human. We fight for survival, but we also fight for our freedom. And you won't take that from us." Zal's face twisted with a mix of annoyance and disbelief. He had believed the veterans would comply. He had thought that humans would see the logic of his plan, that they would help the aliens and ensure their own survival in exchange for peace. But the veterans' refusal was something Sal had not accounted for. He had underestimated the very unpredictability that had fascinated him in the first place. These warriors were not just tools. They were individuals. They were not bound by the rules of logic. They had something more. "This is your final warning," Sal said, his voice low and dangerous. "You will teach us, or we will take the knowledge from you by force. You have no other option." But the veterans were not afraid. They had been in worse situations before. They had faced impossible odds, walked through hell and back, and lived to tell the tale. If the aliens thought they could intimidate them into submission, they were sorely mistaken. Harper took a step forward, his voice strong. "You've made a mistake, Sal. We don't fight for you. We fight for our people. We fight for Earth. And if you want to take our knowledge by force, we'll make sure you regret it." The room seemed to grow colder, and the silence that followed was thick with tension. The veterans knew that the situation had escalated beyond the point of negotiation. They were no longer allies working together. They were enemies, and the stakes were now higher than ever. Zal's eyes narrowed, and he motioned for his soldiers to step forward. The alien soldiers, tall and imposing, began to surround the veterans, their weapons gleaming with a deadly light. But the veterans were not afraid. They had faced enemies far more terrifying than these aliens, and they had always found a way to survive. "I warned you," Sal said coldly. "You will fight us, and you will lose." Harper exchanged a brief glance with the other veterans. They knew what needed to be done. This was no longer about proving who was stronger or smarter. It was about survival. It was about protecting their freedom. Without hesitation, Harper signaled, and the veterans moved into action. The battle began in an instant. The alien soldiers were fast and powerful, their weapons capable of disintegrating anything in their path. But the veterans had something the aliens did not: experience. They had fought wars that had torn entire nations apart. They had fought enemies who had no mercy. They knew how to fight without rules, how to survive in the face of overwhelming odds. General Harper led the charge, his mind calculating every move. He was old, yes, but he had lived through too many battles to be afraid. He knew exactly how to use the environment to his advantage. He threw a flash grenade, blinding the nearest alien soldiers, and then moved in, taking them down with swift, precise strikes. Sarah Miller was a master of stealth. She moved like a shadow, her eyes focused on every movement in the room. She used her agility and speed to disarm the aliens, taking them out one by one with a combination of precision and deadly force. The others followed suit, working together as a team. They knew how to read each other's movements, how to cover each other's backs in the heat of battle. The veterans had been through too much together, and their bond was stronger than any weapon the aliens had. Despite their advanced technology, the aliens were unprepared for the chaos that humans brought into battle. The veterans fought with a fury and unpredictability that threw the aliens off balance. The aliens, who had once believed they could control the situation, were now on the defensive. They had underestimated humanity's will to survive, and they were paying the price for it. As the battle raged on, it became clear that the veterans were winning. They were faster, smarter, and more ruthless than the aliens had expected. The alien soldiers were powerful, but they were not prepared for the sheer determination of the veterans. The veterans fought not just for themselves, but for their people, for Earth, for the future. Finally, after what felt like hours, Sal's voice echoed through the chaos. "Enough," he commanded, his tone filled with both fury and disbelief. "This is not over. You cannot win." But General Harper, bloodied but unbroken, looked Sal square in the eye. "We already won. You tried to take something from us, our freedom, but we won't let you. Not now. Not ever." Zal stood there, seething with rage. He had underestimated humanity's will to fight. The veterans had proven that they would not be controlled. They would not be used. They would fight for their freedom until their last breath. The aliens, seeing that they could not defeat the veterans, slowly began to retreat. Prevails, still furious, gave one last look at the humans before he turned and vanished into the shadows. The veterans stood in the silence that followed, their bodies bruised and battered, but their spirits unbroken. They had fought back and won, not just against the aliens, but for their freedom. The battle was far from over, but for now, the veterans had proven one thing. They were not to be underestimated. They were warriors, unpredictable, ruthless, and impossible to control. The battle had left the veterans bruised, battered, and exhausted. The alien soldiers had retreated, but the tension in the air was thick with uncertainty. It wasn't over yet. Prevails, the leader of the alien force, had withdrawn his troops, but his words still echoed in the veterans' minds. This was not a simple victory. It was only a temporary reprieve. The aliens would regroup, and they would come back with a vengeance. General Harper stood at the center of the room, his hand resting on the hilt of his weapon, his face hard and weathered. His soldiers had fought valiantly, but the cost had been high. They had proven their strength, their resilience, and their ability to survive against overwhelming odds. But now, they had to make a choice: fight until the bitter end, or find a way to escape and protect Earth from the consequences of the aliens' desperation. "We've won this round, but it's not over," Harper said, his voice grim but determined. "They'll be back, and next time, they won't underestimate us. But we have one advantage. We know their weakness." The veterans nodded, their faces set in determination. They had fought alongside Harper for years, through every hardship, every battle. And they knew that this was just the beginning. The aliens had underestimated them before, but that would not happen again. It was time to take the fight to the aliens, to strike before they had a chance to prepare. Sarah Miller, ever the strategist, spoke up. "We can't let them gather more forces. We have to hit them where it hurts. If we destroy their command center, we cripple their ability to rebuild. Without their leadership, they'll be lost." General Harper agreed. "It's a risk, but it's our best chance. We know where they're regrouping. If we strike fast and hit them hard, we can stop them before they can retaliate. This is our chance to end this." The veterans began to move, preparing for the final mission. It would be dangerous, maybe even suicidal, but they had never shied away from impossible odds. They knew that their survival depended on taking the fight directly to the aliens. It wasn't just about winning. It was about ensuring that Earth would be free from their control. The alien command center was located on a distant planet, far from Earth. The veterans had learned the coordinates during their time in captivity, and they knew it was their only chance to stop the aliens from coming back stronger than ever. The journey would be treacherous, but they had faced worse. And now, with their mission clear, they were ready. As they boarded the transport ship, the veterans exchanged silent glances. They didn't need words to know what was at stake. This was it. This was the moment they had been waiting for. Earth's fate rested on their shoulders. The journey through space was long and filled with uncertainty. The transport ship cut through the dark void, and every minute felt like an eternity. The veterans didn't speak much during the trip. There was no need. Each of them had a singular focus: the mission. Their minds were sharp, their bodies still aching from the battle, but they knew this was the final push. When they arrived at the alien world, they were met with a landscape unlike anything they had ever seen. The surface of the planet was harsh and desolate, filled with towering rock formations and strange alien structures. The air was thick with a strange atmosphere, but the veterans pressed on, moving quickly and quietly toward their target. Prevails had not expected them to come. He had believed they would retreat, that they would lick their wounds and go back to Earth. But the veterans had proven time and again that they would never back down. The command center was heavily guarded, but the veterans had faced greater odds before. With their knowledge of the alien forces and their mastery of guerrilla tactics, they infiltrated the base with skill and precision. The first wave of soldiers fell quickly, taken out by the veterans' deadly efficiency. They moved like shadows, striking fast and disappearing before the aliens even knew what had happened. General Harper led the charge, his voice commanding as he directed his team through the alien base. They reached the heart of the command center, where Exal was waiting. The alien leader stood tall, his glowing eyes fixed on the veterans. He knew this was coming. He knew they would fight until the end. But he never expected that humanity's warriors would be the ones to bring him to his knees. "This is the end, Exal," Harper said, his voice cold. "Your species thought it could control us, use us, but you were wrong." Zal's expression twisted with a mix of anger and disbelief. "You cannot stop us. We are beyond you. We have evolved. We are stronger than you can imagine." But Harper was unshaken. "You may have evolved, but you'll never understand what it means to truly fight. We fight with heart, with soul, with everything we are. And that's something you can never replicate." With that, the veterans launched their final assault on the alien command center. Explosions rocked the building as the team planted charges in strategic locations. The alien defenses crumbled under the weight of the veterans' attack. Saul and his soldiers fought back fiercely, but the veterans were relentless. They were fighting for more than just survival now. They were fighting for their home, for Earth's future, and for their freedom. As the final explosion shook the command center, Saul let out a furious scream. But it was too late. The command center was in ruins, and the aliens' ability to regroup was shattered. Harper stood amidst the wreckage, breathing heavily but triumphant. He looked at his team, his comrades, and knew that they had won. They had faced the aliens, fought with everything they had, and come out victorious. "We did it," Sarah Miller said, her voice filled with both relief and pride. General Harper nodded, his expression somber but resolute. "We didn't just win a battle. We won the right to live free. And that's a victory that no one can ever take from us." As the veterans boarded their ship and began the journey back to Earth, they knew that their fight was far from over. The world they had fought to protect was changing, and the aliens' threat might still linger in the shadows. But for now, they had proven that humanity's warriors could not be defeated, not by anyone, not by anything. And that, above all else, was the true victory.